How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, of course, we're going to focus on Tropical Cyclone 16, which is now just off the coast of Florida, and it's expected to move northward and develop eventually into a tropical storm once we begin to see a little bit more rotation and convective activity around the center of circulation. It's very well possible this will be considered a subtropical storm. It's definitely attaining some subtropical characteristics, such as baroclinic instability, enhancing the storm's convection, but it's still going to have at least somewhat of a warm core to still be considered somewhat tropical as it moves up the coast. But whether it's tropical or not, the impacts will remain the same. You should expect strong winds along the east coast, as well as very dangerous coastal flooding and just regular river flooding when it comes to rainfall. And of course, we have another disturbance which now has an 80% chance of developing, which likely will become Tropical Storm Felipe within the next few days, and potentially Hurricane Felipe in the more long-term future once this approaches the Caribbean. And taking a look at the forecast track from the National Hurricane Center at this time, it does look somewhat concerning because it looks like it's headed straight for the Caribbean islands. However, there's still hope that this will move just to the north of you guys and not really impact any lands in general, which would certainly be the best case scenario. But we're gonna definitely need to take a look at some factors before we can say with certainty if this will impact the Caribbean or not. So we're gonna go into detail with that in this video. So here's a look at potential Tropical Cyclone 16. Like I said, it's just off the Florida coast, right around the latitude of Daytona Beach. There is a decent amount of convective activity going on just to the north of the center of circulation, which should develop right around this area. The current surface level low is located right over here. You could probably tell by the amount of convection we're seeing. It is associated with the more northerly or extratropical portion of this storm system, where this rotation is primarily enhanced by the instability that this area of convection is dealing with. However, we should eventually see a warm core surface level low develop here and take over as the main center circulation of this storm and continue to intensify, potentially close to hurricane status just before it reaches the coast of North Carolina. And it's certainly going to need some instability to help enhance the convection as well as the wind speed of this storm as it moves further northward. Its wind speed is right now 35 miles per hour. The reason why it's not considered a tropical depression just yet is because, like I said, the National Hurricane Center wants to see a little bit more convection surrounding this surface level low, and want to actually see the winds increase and pretty much right around this surface level low. But it's likely that it's eventually going to develop into a tropical storm, or at least, at the very least, a subtropical storm as it moves northward. So here's a close look at what the European model is currently forecasting with potential Tropical Cyclone 16 likely to become Tropical Storm Ophelia as it continues ahead further northward. We see that the European model is expecting the pressure to drop right around the low 990s as it approaches the Carolinas and should make landfall somewhere in between Cape Hatteras or around the Wilmington area of North Carolina. Cape Lookout, I meant to say. So somewhere around this area, you should expect a landfall. However, the wind field of this storm will be very large because, like I said, this isn't a fully tropical entity. This will attain some extratropical characteristics, which means that typically during extratropical or subtropical cyclone, the wind field tends to be a lot larger because it's not just the core of this storm that's producing the energy and pressure that's low enough for the wind speed to increase. It's also getting a lot of its energy from outside influences, with such as instability, where the cooler air surrounding this storm system will help enhance the wind field of this storm, since the cold air is well to the outside, hundreds of miles away from the low pressure system. So that expands the wind field. So even though the center of circulation will be right around the Cape Lookout area of North Carolina right around the early Saturday timeframe. The wind field should expand as far north as southern New England, where during as early as Saturday morning, areas along the New Jersey coast will already experience wind gusts of 60 miles per hour. And in fact, this is when the peak of the storm should be right around the Jersey Shore, as well as Long Island and the Delmarva Peninsula, which may be surprising to many because center of circulation is going to be well far to the south of those states, and in fact this storm will only get closer. However, by this point the storm will be a lot weaker, so the peak of the storm will already have passed. So peak of the storm should be when this storm is actually in North Carolina, which may be a surprise, but that's when you should expect the worst of the impacts, right around Saturday morning to Saturday afternoon for pretty much the entirety of the mid-Atlantic, because this is when the storm should be its strongest. But taking a look at the rainfall, we do see heavy rain extends pretty much throughout Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and the southern New England coast, where you should expect anywhere at the very least 2 to 4 inches of rain, and potentially more than that, more specifically right around Virginia and North Carolina and portions of the Delmarva Peninsula. I wouldn't be surprised if you see anywhere between 4 to 6 inches of rain, and maybe even a little bit more than that in some localized areas. So make sure to prepare for river flooding. The possibility of flash flooding certainly exists. This storm system, like I said, will have a decent amount of instability surrounding it, and combining the cooler fall-like air along with a very warm tropical core-like entity, that's going to create enough instability for some stronger thunder showers to develop. So of course the possibility of flash flooding will exist embedded in those thunder showers, so you want to be prepared for that possibility throughout the mid-Atlantic as we approach the Saturday to Sunday timeframe. And this is going to move very slowly. It's not until, I'll say, Tuesday is when this storm will finally completely move out of the mid-Atlantic and New England. So this should be a pretty long duration event. It's going to be a very ugly weekend when it comes to weather for much of the Northeast. It's just going to be very rainy, windy as well. It's definitely not recommended to do any outdoor activities, and along the coast, make sure to stay safe. Be aware of the possibility of coastal flooding. And the certainty is fairly high with this storm system at this point. Of course, we're only anywhere between 24 to 72 hours out with this storm system from when it impacts the United States, so it's definitely highly certain at this time. A GFS model is also forecasting the same thing, very similar tracks, very similar strength, taking landfall somewhere around this area. The GFS model is a bit stronger, but it's pretty much the same when it comes to impacts along the coast. Expect wind gusts over 60 miles per hour, coastal flooding anywhere between 2 to 4 to 1 to 3 feet of storm surge along the coast, pretty much anywhere that's just south of Long Branch, New Jersey, as far south as, let's say, Myrtle Beach. That's where you should expect anywhere from 1 to 4 feet of storm surge. So make sure to be aware of that along the coast, and be aware of river flooding in general, as there's high certainty with this forecast. It's unlikely that this will strengthen much more than a stronger tropical storm, because it is dealing with a decent amount of wind shear, and plus it won't have a ton of time over water for this to potentially strengthen into anything more than a strong tropical storm. At the very, very worst, low-end hurricane, but I doubt that's going to happen, especially since this will attain subtropical characteristics, which means that the wind field will be a little bit too large for the energy to be dispersed in a way to maximize the max wind speed. Rather, the energy will be spread out, which means that while the max wind speed won't be that strong, its wind field will be very large, and that will lead to a more long duration event and potentially more storm surge than you would see with a hurricane at this millibar pressure. So definitely keep that in mind as well. Here's the National Hurricane Center's forecast when it comes to potential Tropical Cyclone 16. We do see that this should make landfall, like I said, anywhere between Cape Hatteras and Wilmington, probably right around the Cape Lookout area of North Carolina. And we do see tropical storm warnings are issued as far south as Wilmington and as far north as Ocean City, Maryland. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see those warnings get upgraded a little bit further northward, potentially up to Rehoboth Beach and potentially as far north as the Jersey Shore, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, since the Jersey Shore, even though you're not under a tropical storm warning right now, you should expect tropical storm like impacts from this storm system, where you should expect 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and of course it'll weaken once it moves over land and loses connection with the warmer Gulf Stream waters a little bit further southward. But the worst of the impacts for pretty much the entirety of the mid-Atlantic should be Saturday morning to Saturday afternoon. Here is the amount of rainfall you should expect. So for North Carolina and portions of Eastern Virginia, you should expect anywhere from 4 to 6 inches of rain, which is certainly enough to cause major river flooding as well as localized flash flooding. But for the most part, for much of southern New England as well as the mid-Atlantic, you should expect 2 to 4 inches of rain, which is still considered a heavy amount of rain, and especially especially along the rivers where the river level may be higher, that is certainly enough to cause river flooding, and that doesn't even include the possibility of flash flooding, in which the total amount of rainfall won't matter during a flash flood scenario. All you need is a heavy amount of rainfall within a short time period to create a flash flood. The total amount of rainfall doesn't necessarily matter when it comes to flash flooding, so you want to be aware of that throughout much of the mid-Atlantic and extending even as far west as Washington D.C. You should expect very heavy rainfall from this storm system. And of course, a big concern along the coast is storm surge flooding, where anywhere between Surf City, North Carolina, as far north as the border of Virginia and Maryland, you should expect 2 to 4 feet of storm surge flooding and potentially 3 to 5 feet of storm surge flooding right up along the bays of North Carolina. And if you don't know what storm surge flooding is, pretty much go right by the coast over normally dry ground. Add 3 to 5 feet of water on top of that, and that's how much flooding you should expect right up along the coast. And remember, all it takes is 6 inches of swiftly moving water to knock you off your feet and 2 feet of water to completely move a car. So you don't want to underestimate storm surge flooding up along the coast, because this amount of storm surge flooding, 2 to 4 feet, is enough to move vehicles in the water. So definitely keep that in mind throughout the Carolinas and Virginia, and even extending northward into Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, you should expect 1 to 3 feet of storm surge flooding, as I might actually report there this Saturday, right up maybe around Atlantic City, reporting on the storm surge flooding, see how much storm surge flooding we will get, if we do get any. But even if we don't, the winds will still be very strong. It'll still be a very good experience. So make sure to stay tuned if you want to see me report live here in Atlantic City this Saturday. So make sure to subscribe if you aren't, and make sure to keep watching for more updates, because I do plan to drive down from northern New Jersey to Atlantic City this Saturday to report on the storm. But anyways, expect 1 to 3 feet of storm surge flooding right up along Jersey Shore as well as the Delmarva Peninsula. So here's the Futurecast radar. Here's what you should expect when it comes to rainfall. So the rainfall should begin to approach the Carolinas right around late Friday or Friday afternoon, I meant to say. And if we were to continue to move forward, we do see that by the Friday evening, the rain should approach the southern portion of the Delmarva Peninsula as well as southeastern Virginia before it eventually approaches the Jersey Shore right around very early on Saturday. And we should see a landfall right around 3 to 4 a.m. Anywhere between Cape Lookout and Wilmington. So definitely keep that in mind. That's where you should expect the strongest of the winds. But like I said, the winds will still be strong well to the north of the center circulation, where at this point the coast of New Jersey should experience wind gusts of 60 miles per hour, and New York could experience wind gusts of 40 miles per hour. Philadelphia, same. You should expect 40 mile per hour wind gusts from this storm system, which could be enough to bring some branches down and move some loose things out in the open that are out in the open right over the trajectory of the wind. And moving forward, we do see the rain will continue all day for much of the Northeast and including North Carolina and Virginia. So make sure to keep that in mind. Pretty much all Saturday, it should be just torrential rainfall all throughout the Northeast. And here's the amount of wind you should expect all throughout the East Coast. So you should expect any wind gusts right up along the coast.